or the fiat currency collapses, it's good that people know about this, and the more people that own gold, the better. And I think this is important.
Inflation is a tax, so this is the reason the monetary issue is so important to me, because ultimately, if you want to protect liberty and the size of government, you have to have honest money.
I have coin collections and things and numismatics, and I wouldn't want to, I just don't think of it that way. It's sort of like, do you think about your cash value of your insurance policies? I don't do that.
The value of the dollar goes down. They're taxing inflation, so that's very unfair. And numismatic coins also go up, not only because they're old, and there will always be numismatic values going up, which people should be rewarded for because they have studied it and pick and choose the coins. But if a numismatic coin goes up and is very expensive, that's one of the first places people go to try to protect themselves against the debasement of currency.
Welcome to Coffee with Lynette. I'm Lynette Zang, Chief Market Analyst here at ITM Trading, a full-service gold and silver dealer specializing in custom strategies to help you survive and thrive through the reset that has already begun. Today we have a very, very special guest with us, Dr. Ron Paul, who began his political career in 1976 after Nixon broke the US dollar's peg to gold in 1971. He is a fully committed constitutionalist and believes strongly in honest money as defined in the US Constitution. In 1982, under President Ronald Reagan, he created and served on the U.S. Gold Commission. The resulting report, The Case for Gold, evaluated the role of gold in the monetary system. An advocate of thoughtful Austrian economics, and as a congressman, he focused his efforts on fair taxation and the financial sector, and was the most senior member of the Monetary Policy Subcommittee, which, ironically enough, actually oversees the Federal Reserve. In response to the 2008 financial crisis, he introduced the Federal Reserve Transparency Act, which is better known as Audit the Fed. And while it passed the House, it never made it through the Senate. But through his tireless continuing efforts, it has been reintroduced again this year. He is known to defend the gold standard and oppose government regulations that interfere with the free markets. He continues to lead the way to honest money through a grassroots effort supporting states to return gold and silver to legal tender status. This tireless man clearly believes in education. His YouTube channel, Ron Paul Liberty Report, covers unfolding global events today, as does his weekly column in the Foundation of Rational Economics and Education, which focuses on civil liberties. His Institute for Peace and Prosperity, which is an offshoot of the foundation, is clearly all about education, as is his Campaign for Liberty, which focuses on reclaiming the Republic through restoring the Constitution. I could go on and on, but time is short with this very busy man. So without further ado, I am honored and humbled to present to you today Dr. Ron Paul. Welcome to Coffee with Lynette, Dr. Paul.
Nice to talk with you, Lynette.
So the first question that I have for you is, in 1982, under President Reagan, you were on the U.S. Gold Commission tasked with really examining the early part of this fiat money experiment. And really, you came up with a fantastic report afterwards. I wish that they had actually, used it. looking at the role of gold in the monetary system and trying to protect Americans from gold confiscation. So can you tell us what your concerns were on why you felt it was important to do that and what happened during that period of time? And do you also think there's a potential for gold confiscation in the future?
Yes, I remember it well. I think the conference actually, commission met on in '81. It was actually passed under Carter. And Jesse Helms supported it in the Senate, and I supported it in the House. So I was a little bit surprised they let it go through. And ironically, they stuck it on a bill that I couldn't support, the IMF bill. I remember that clearly. So after working all that time, we got it passed. I got the credit for it, but technically I didn't support the IMF bill. But no, there was chaos in the 70s. That's how I got involved in politics from 1971 after the Bretton Woods broke down. We weren't even allowed to own gold until 75. So, and then gold went from $35 an ounce up to over $800, at least, for a short period of time. So the conditions were wild. And if you do percentage-wise, that's a tremendous increase percentage-wise in the gold price. But it was chaotic, and that was the reason people were still thinking about gold more so than they do even now. Officials aren't allowed to think about it because Bernanke explained to me, gold is not money. What do you want to talk about that for? So that was the way the Gold Commission came about. And there were 17 members on the commission, and 15 of them were very, very strongly anti-gold. That's why we had to do the minority report, and Lou Lehrman signed the report with me on that.
That's true. So didn't you try to put some language in there to protect the public and enable them to continue to hold gold?
Oh, well, they were able to own gold at that time.
Yes.
One thing, and that wasn't being challenged. The one thing I was trying to do was, get the people to know whether or not there was any gold at Fort Knox. And that was turned down. We had a vote on it. It was 15-2 that we shouldn't audit the gold, to find out where it is. So that was it. Of course, I wanted people to own the gold, and I was doing everything possible we could. And that I've always favored getting rid of the legal tender laws and letting gold, if they were going to keep the fiat system around, I wanted people to be able to legally use gold as a currency because that's what the Constitution says. But instead, they make the legal tender laws to say that we have to use paper money and that you're not allowed to use silver dollars as legal tender, which was still a possibility, especially after gold became legal.
Right. Well, that leads us really to your work with the states and now the movement that's been underway to have the states, and I saw you when you were in Arizona. We didn't meet personally, but I definitely was paying very close attention to what happened. And I actually thought it was really interesting how you responded to that one representative when you were in there working on passing HB 2014 in 2017. I thought your response to, I can't find his name now, but I thought your response to that one representative was absolutely brilliant on how they tax inflation and they tax real money. Could you go into that in more detail?
Well, it is now, and that was about what that bill was all about, and that was the first state that finally acted, and we keep working. Our Campaign for Liberty, that's one of their biggest issues, to try to get the states to do something. And the Constitution is so clear. The founders assumed that it was the states that were at fault by printing too much money. And that was one thing that was to be nationalized, and that was that you could use gold and silver as legal tender, and that was the only thing the states were permitted to do. So this is an easy target. Anybody with common sense would say, hey, they're right about this. And so Arizona was a big help. We did get that. But my whole point there was, how can it be money if you're taxing it? If you go and take $10 bill to the bank and get 10 ones out, they don't try to tax you on it, either sales tax or capital gains tax. But that's what they do with gold and silver. And we want to make sure that a state can't tax money. If it's legal tender, you shouldn't have to pay a sales tax to get a hold of it. And then if your gold coin goes from $500 to $1,000 and then you spend it, you have to pay capital gains tax on that $500. Well, that ruins the whole thing about money. But in the meantime, until we have more people understanding it and they reject it, or the fiat currency collapses, it's good that people know about this, and the more people that own gold, the better. And I think this is important. But my effort is also now still honing in on repealing the legal tender laws and making sure you can't tax money.
Absolutely. I think we have 11 states. West Virginia just passed it, didn't they? I think earlier this year. So there are 11 states so far that are on board with this. And, it's really a grassroots effort. And that's what we're going to have to do, because the federal government is going to help us with that. They installed the Federal Reserve.
That's right. Now, it's going to self-destruct as we speak. The Fed has lost control of the overnight rates, and they have to start QE again, it looks like. But no, the Fed is impossible to exist forever, because we are very rich in its reserve currencies, and people take it, and we have a powerful military. The situation is such that we've been able to print money and sort of force people to take it. And we have so much control over the financial system. But that is not permanent. Reserve currencies don't last forever. And that's why the education part is so important, that people know, so that, when the time comes, and you did ask earlier on, what about confiscation? Is that what's going to happen? If the Fed collapses and nobody wants paper money, and you use gold and silver, they're going to come along and confiscate it like you did. That was the first thing that Roosevelt did, confiscate the gold. And it was only $20 an ounce then, and he quickly changed it to $35 an ounce. I think that hopefully our spirit for liberty is a little stronger than that. I hope it's equivalent to how the people will react if the government comes and says, no, we don't want to just register your gun, just turn up all in. But, our government is not known to be always very swift and understanding about what freedom is all about.
Or constitutional in the way they execute policy as well. And, I wanted to talk a little bit more on the ability, part of the whole fiat system is their ability to tax inflation gains, which they create by devaluing the currency. And I heard you talk about that, and I hadn't honestly, up until I heard you discuss that, I hadn't really thought about that particular angle. So I think that's brilliant. If you would explain, how, it is an evil genius plan, but.
Yeah, on occasion, legislatures have tried to protect about it, because if you're because your tax rate goes up at a different rate, the more money you make. But what if the fiat currency caused prices to double, and just theoretically, your wages doubled, and then all of a sudden your tax rate goes up, but the value of the money didn't go up, but your tax rate goes up. And matter of fact, it is on purpose that they have inflation. Inflation is also what they do, use that to liquidate debt. They know they can't pay this debt. And but what they do is, if we owe 22 trillion, if they could just tomorrow turn a switch on and double the money supply, the debt is cut in half. And they don't do it like that, but they do it steadily. And that's what QE was all about. And they want high inflation rate, always to serve the interest of the government. And the government's supposed to serve the interest of the consumer and protect honesty and money.
Well, that's the point of gold and silver, is it forces governments to be fiscally responsible, and it holds the value. So it's really ridiculous that, well, it isn't ridiculous, it's evil genius. Are you surprised by the record-breaking amounts of gold that the central banks are accumulating now?
No, I think it's understandable, but the numbers are very impressive. And, when they challenged me about the silliness of holding gold, I said, all those people are buying gold overseas, and we here in the West are selling gold. I can remember one time, probably 20 years ago or so, it was back the last time gold was around $300, so that would have been at the beginning of this century. And the British they were selling their gold, and they were getting $300. And I remember I brought it up to Greenspan in the committee, and he should have known better. He probably does, since he knew about gold. I said, why are they selling their gold at $300 an ounce? It doesn't seem to be too smart. You don't know. They know what they're doing. They're smart. And that was the bottom of the gold, and then it took off. The next stop was like $1,800 or something.
Right, but you also indicated, and I'm on board with you 100%, that it's not so much gold going up to 1,800. It's a readjustment from all of the paper that they have printed.
Yeah, and that's important, and we do talk about the price of gold, but what we want to talk about is the value of gold, the value of money, the definition. This is what you lose under today's situation. You don't have a measuring rod for value. In the past, no matter what country called their currency, as long as it was convertible into gold, that was the measurement of value. I compare it to somebody building a skyscraper, and every day the measuring rod, the yardstick, changed the measure. And you're supposed to build a sturdy building. So we try to build a sturdy economy by fiat and debt and all these kind of things. And it doesn't work. It makes a fragile economy. And that's why many times we just translate that into a bubble. There's too much malinvestment and too much debt, and that's where we are today. So it's the fact that you have to have a definition, and that's the real problem. If you're going to have a currency, it has to have a precise definition, and if it's going to be related to gold, you have to define it exactly. Exactly.
And I've also heard you actually a number of times talk about when people say, wow, I mean, spot gold went from 1,900 an ounce down to 1,150, in 2016. And I heard people ask you, well, wow, aren't your holdings dropped? Doesn't that bother you? Well, does it bother you when the spot price of gold moves? And if it doesn't, why? Why doesn't it bother you?
No, and it's a very erratic at time, but that's the dollar that's erratic. As a matter of fact, that 2016, that went a little over $1,000. That's a pretty big jump for where we are right now, and that's a lot of paper money been produced in that time, and of course that's going to continue.
Well, it is, but you've also said even recently that there's going to have all of this QE, all of the inflation. When they print the money, that is the inflation, and there will be an adjustment coming in our future.
Right. We talk about inflation, and the government wants us to think only about CPI. The measurement of inflation is CPI, and that's all fiction because that's rigged. It's artificial, and the inflation is the printing and the creation of money. It used to be paper money, then it used to be just a computer, but now it's QE to the trillions of dollars to pass out to all the banks to get them to survive, and that's the inflation. The inflate in the money supply. The consequence of inflation, this varies. It sometimes pushes up commodity prices, which it has. It hasn't done it like in the 70s, but it has gone up. Just talk to somebody on fixed income. Their cost of living is going up. So sometimes it goes into the industries that government gets involved in, like medicine and education. It goes there, but the big one is it's gone into debt. All governments, because for some reason there's a trust in the dollar that I think people are getting fooled. So they say, well, the dollars are good. It's the best one compared to other currencies. It's pretty good.
Relatively speaking.
So it's the only measurement. The long-term measurement is what is the purchasing power of gold, and of course the old comparison that people use is usually, if you even look at over centuries, a gold ounce can buy you a good suit. And they say it maintains its purchasing power. It doesn't fix prices, but it maintains value. And then the prices have to be flexible. One mistake that we made in this country is we had the rigidity of the bimetallism. They had a rigid ratio between gold and silver. You can have both circulating, but they can't be rigidly attached, and that's one reason why that failed. So when people tell me, Ron, you just want to go back to the old days of the gold standard, I said, yeah, I'd like gold, and I think we should use it in the Constitution, but I don't think we need to just go back to the old one. We can actually think about gold as money in a much more sophisticated and a modern way, and we can have a better gold standard.
Exactly, but it is a standard against which you can measure everything instead of the moving target of fiat money and all of that debt. And that kind of begs the question about the negative rates and also going cashless, which is where I think we're probably headed.
Yeah, I think we're moving in that direction, which is a bad sign. Negative rates is totally insane. How do you sell a bond that doesn't make any interest? It just doesn't make any sense at all. And so that's why I think we're nearing the end of this, and
Exactly.
Sometimes it can come up pretty fast. What's going to have happened the last couple of days on some of these overnight rates, they've been trying for years and years to get the inflation rate up to 2% and keep the interest rates down, and they thought they had total control. And all of a sudden, the near zero rates is bopped up to 2 in some countries, up to 10%. Some of those overnight rates go. So when it goes, it's going to go big time. But someday it'll cause a real rush for the exits, and that's when people will probably want to own something of value. It will be gold and silver, but there will be other things that will have real value too.
Yes, exactly. And, and as you were talking too, we have to look at that if they can get us to go cashless so that everything, and the hub, I mean, they're really practicing it and they're trying to work this out, where every single transaction, the global payment system, every single transaction goes through the global central banks first, and then it gets distributed. So for government, that's a lifetime taxable event and easy to take away. And, for central banks, it gives them the ability to immediately execute their policy. How do you think that's going to work for people that are not protecting themselves?
That's one thing they can do, and they'll have that information will help them. But I think they have another goal. They want to know where you're spending your money and how much you're spending and where you got it and did you pay taxes on it. I think it's a revenue thing. The sales taxes, states love it. They can collect the sales taxes. It used to be always guaranteed that you bought it on the internet and bought it across state lines, you didn't pay sales taxes, but now they're cracking down on that. So I know it's a tax revenue issue, but the cashless society is, I think, very dangerous. But people get conditioned for it because it is definitely more convenient. It used to be that using a credit card slowed up a line at a store, but now it speeds it up, because if you give them a card, you're done in 2 seconds. But if you get out your wallet and get them a $100 bill and say, "Oh my God," that holds up the line. So people like the efficiency of it. But the big thing is are people being honest about the account, the currency, and whether the currency is maintaining value. That's a completely different thing.
That is, and that's what we should pay attention to, the nominal value of, a $20 bill was the same thing 20 years ago or as it is today, but what it buys you is so much different. So can you tell me, I know that you've wanted to abolish the Fed for a long time because obviously they are unconstitutional. Do you have hope that this time, since Audit the Fed has been reinstated again, or they're going for Audit the Fed, do you think that's going to pass? Do you think there's enough appetite now?
We still need a lot of support. We passed it twice in the House of Representatives, but they did that only as a political stunt to let me have that. But it would never pass in the Senate and the House. And then, Trump wants a policy which is exactly opposite of what you and I are talking about. He wants to print faster and interest rates lower. He likes negative rates. He's never going to sign Audit the Fed bill. So but I still think this effort and what they've done in Arizona and these different states to to talk about legal tender, it's important to get people educated to know what's going on. But the Fed will probably self-destruct. And right now, there's a lot of talk. It used to be nobody even knew about the Federal Reserve, but now they're talking about, even as we speak, they're talking about it. Has the Fed lost control? Yeah, I think so. They've lost control, and they can sort of grab hold of it again by another QE. I mean, that's what they might, announce here shortly, another QE, and that will restore a bit of control. But we don't know when the last one will come where people just give up on it.
Yeah, I think Japan is a great leading indicator since they've been working on it for so long. And even with their yield curve control, where they're trying to control the yields, and even their yields inverted. So, I mean, what do you think about the massive amount of global yield curve inversions that are going on right now? I mean, that's an indication we're in trouble, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the Fed does rig rates, and they set rates, and they're able to do it. But they're not as powerful as the market. And the market's always competing with them. So when I see something breaking loose like what's happening right now with short rates, that means the market is overriding the rigging done by the Federal Reserve. Exactly. But that's what they did with gold from the Bretton Woods in 1945 all the way up to 1971. They said the dollar is as good as gold, and America will defend this, and foreigners can turn in their dollars and get their gold. But so that was price fixing. It was artificial.
Absolutely.
And the breakdown of Bretton Woods is a big event in monetary history, because that is when the market overwhelmed and proved that the money managers were completely wrong, and people weren't going to accept the dollar. The foreigners no longer would turn it in if they can't get the gold, and that was a big deal. And now they're not ready to go to sound money, because it's a big deal to go backwards too. But the markets will demand it. They'll ultimately set the interest rates, and I imagine even on some credit cards, I don't know much about what they're paying, but I know they're much higher than the 1 or 2% the banks are paying.
Oh yeah, I think it's something like 17. And one last question, because I know our time is short.
Right.
In your view, what are the top dangers that we're facing, and why this time might be so much worse than what happened in 2008?
Well, I think the big thing is the debt's bigger than ever, and the debt has to be liquidated. And it won't be liquidated by people working harder and getting another job and sending more money to the government. It's not going to happen. An individual could do that, but sometimes an individual can't even pay off their debt, and they have to, go into bankruptcy. So we're not going to work the debt off, which means they're going to keep printing, and that's what they've been doing. And then the money will lose its purchasing power. And then the debt will be liquidated. It'll just be that, if you get $1 for $100, all of a sudden you can pay the debt off, because they will have printed so much money. If they add some zeros to our dollars, and that would pay off the debt. But the debt will be liquidated. Then you worry about political chaos. That's why we have to keep things legal. Yeah, as long as there's a legal option. Public school, government education is a horror. But if you have the legal right to get out, there's still hope. And you have to have a legal right to own a gun. You have to have a legal right to own gold and silver. But if it gets down to the point where you can't, then you're going to have civil strife. And right now, there's a bunch of people who actually would like to see more civil strife because they sort of are obedient to the cultural Marxists who believe that chaos will allow us to enter into a fascist Marxist state.
Yeah, I hope that is not something that we see for our children, for our grandchildren, and even for us.
Right.
But I have to thank you so much for your time today. I have so many more questions. And I hope maybe at some point you would honor me by coming back again. But keep up that good work. I support you. I think everybody out there needs to support you. And please, you are tireless. I'm so impressed with you.
Well, on this issue, if you get in touch with our Campaign for Liberty you could be helpful to us to help promote that cause, because we deal so much with changing the legislatures and the Congress on their attitude toward fiat money.
Yes, at the grassroots level. All of those links will be available. They're there below, and we'll have some other things on the blog with some images and also the links, because Dr. Paul, what can I say? Thank you for coming on Coffee with Lynette.
Good. Nice to be with you. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. This is a man that has focused his entire career on supporting honest money for the individual. He's been in the trenches inside of the government, even overseeing the committee that oversees the Federal Reserve. He understands how these institutions control the fiat money system, the money that you work for and that you try and save. And this is why he supports gold, physical gold and silver. Keep in mind, financial shields are made of physical gold and silver, not fiat promises or contracts. So until next we meet, please be careful out there. Bye-bye.